Hello, welcome. This is a video that nobody asked for, but I thought would be fun to do, reacting to unpopular opinions in the language learning community. May or may not actually be unpopular, but what people think are unpopular. We will start with Twitter. So this is just a search for unpopular opinions under Lang Tweet. Obviously, disclaimer, first of all, that I'm not an expert. I don't know anything. This is just me reacting to these, not saying whether they are true or not, obviously. Certain YouTube polyglots that make language learning look easy don't encourage people to learn languages. They discourage language learners. I think it has the possibility to be inspiring to some people, but at least an equal amount of people probably will find it discouraging. Unpopular opinion, Anki doesn't work for me. I do use Quizlet, but that alone doesn't work either, mostly for keeping a record of new words and easier vocab review. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's that unpopular of an opinion that Anki doesn't work. I think it's a polarized issue. Like, I think it's popular to think Anki is the best thing ever created for language learning, and I think it's also popular to think, oh, I hate this. I'm never going to use this. I've never been able to sustain flashcards in any app. The closest I've come is Closemaster, and even then I just use it periodically. It's more efficient to teach a language with an unfamiliar script through transliteration first, then gradually through the script at about A2 level. I feel like I kind of disagree with that, unless you need to use the language really quickly. Like if I was learning survival Arabic or something to travel to an Arabic speaking country, of course I would focus more on what it sounds like. But if I was actually trying to learn to like a good level, I would learn the script first, I think. But I've never learned a language with a different script, so. Unpopular opinion, don't learn two languages at once. I think this one is sort of common sense. Like if you want to make really fast progress, focus on one language. If it's not that important to you to make that faster progress, then you can split your attention, I don't know. Potentially unpopular opinion. When starting a new language as an absolute beginner, if you're going to use CEFR levels, I say that wrong every single time I say it, you might want to disregard C1 and C2 and just focus on the path from A1 to B2. Most likely as a beginner, your idea of C2 is actually only B2 anyway. I agree with this. I think it's fine if you want to like someday achieve the C levels, obviously, like I do, but I completely agree with the idea that like your idea of C2 is probably B2 anyway. Like you don't know what you don't know until you get pretty close to knowing it. Just don't worry about it. Like just focus on getting to where you can understand most conversations, media, blah, blah, blah. Like, you really don't need to worry about the high levels until you get close to them. Unpopular opinion, everybody has an accent. You may even have traces of several accents. An accent is your oral signature. A neutral accent is a myth that needs to be debunked. Totally agree. I think it's fine to not want your native language or other languages that you know to have too much influence on your target language. Like I don't particularly want to sound like an English speaker speaking Spanish, because that means that I'm probably not pronouncing things in a very Spanish way. But I don't mind at all if people can tell that I'm not a native Spanish speaker. Like, first of all, it would just be kind of miserable if I cared that much about it, because I'm probably never going to sound like a native speaker. I'm also just not a native speaker, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with not being a native speaker. And like even within native speakers, like a neutral accent is usually like quite a classist, racist concept. Like, yeah, I completely agree with this one. Languages that you have learned up to a solid B2 level will stay with you more even without using it for a very long time compared to those languages you have learned up to only B1. I don't think that's an unpopular opinion, to be honest. I think that just makes sense. I get that The Little Prince got translated into many languages, but it's not that easy to read. Completely agree. It's a very philosophical book. I don't think the vocabulary of The Little Prince is like crazy difficult, but it's also not like a great first book to read unless you wait quite a while to read. Like, yeah. And if you've never read it before, it's easily one of those books where you could read it, look at the sentence and be like, I understand all of the words in this sentence, but I don't know what the sentence is saying, because it is such a like philosophical kind of book. Language learners should learn basic IPA of their native language and target language. I don't know any IPA, so this is probably an unpopular opinion with me, just in that I have never prioritized doing it. I think it would be a lot more beneficial in languages that are less saturated in the internet. Like, it almost never happens that I can't find a sound recording for a word in either Spanish or English or any of the other languages I've ever studied. So it has never been important, but if I was learning a language that didn't have that kind of saturation online, then I could totally see this becoming important. The making natives uncomfortable fluency trope has to stop. Yeah, I have no use for that whatsoever. I don't care what that man Steve has to say. There's really no such thing as learning a language without learning their culture. It shouldn't be a thing. Some things you have to be culturally wise about to even understand. Yeah, completely. Like, you could theoretically learn the grammar and vocabulary of another language, but you're not going to be an effective user of it unless you understand the cultural background behind it, for sure. Maybe it's an unpopular opinion, but I think consistency is not always about doing something every day. It's also knowing that even if you haven't done something today, you didn't lose your consistency and you will be back at it tomorrow. Completely agree. I think doing something every single day for many people is not realistic or even helpful. Depends on the person, 100%. I've gone through phases where doing something every single day was extremely important to me, and then that has not always been true. So, but yeah, I think absolutely, like, the key component of consistency is that missing a day doesn't mean that you just stop. Like, that's the key. Whew. This moving thing is killing me. For us adults, being literate is to some extent a handicap for achieving fluency in a foreign language. Ooh, interesting. I wouldn't say it's a handicap. In my opinion, it's not a handicap, but it's a crutch. Like, I definitely have this, I think, with Spanish. Like, there are so many words that you can understand because of the way that they look. I think it can be both it's obviously an aid, which is good, to understanding, but you can get over dependent on it. I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about this more. We're getting away from Lang tweet here, so we can go to Reddit soon. I don't like to learn colloquial or informal vocabulary before I have a strong base in the formal one. I can see this. I definitely agree with, like, not learning extreme slang or profanity on purpose early in your language learning. Like, I would not seek it out. Yeah, to me, it's more just like it shouldn't be an emphasis, but like what comes up naturally means that is just used a lot in the language, and therefore is something that I think we should probably learn. So let's see some Reddit opinions. Most people in the community don't know what they're talking about, just spread misinformation and give terrible advice. I agree that most people in the community do not know what they're talking about, myself included. Like, there are obviously people who have learned a lot of languages and have a lot of personal, knowledge to share from that. That doesn't mean it's applicable to everybody. An aptitude for languages doesn't guarantee fast progress. It takes a fair amount of time to maintain, let alone improve your language level, and even if your memory is great and you're a skilled learner, you can't become fluent in 3 months. Yeah, I agree with the other person. This doesn't necessarily seem like an unpopular opinion. I do not agree necessarily that there is no such thing or that an aptitude for learning languages doesn't help. I see people say that a lot, like that there's no such thing as an aptitude for language, and I disagree with that. I think absolutely You can have like an uncanny ability to just remember things that you've heard 1 or 2 times. You can have an uncanny ability to mimic so that you don't really struggle with accent necessarily. You can understand patterns implicitly really, really well and therefore not really struggle that much with grammar. Like, there's all kinds of things that you might have a natural ability for that would help with language learning. And if you have multiple of those, then I think it doesn't guarantee fast progress like this says, but to me, it's undeniable that it's going to make progress faster, given equal amounts of effort with someone who doesn't have those abilities. Like, I don't know. But I agree, it does take a fair amount of time for everybody. I got heavily downvoted once for saying that service industry workers, especially waiters and cashiers, are under no obligation to help you practice your target language. For sure. If you're backing up the line and making everyone lose time, blah, blah, blah. I don't know how that's an unpopular opinion. I do think that, like, if you aren't backing up the line, then it's rude for the person to get impatient with you just because you have an accent or just because you might say something incorrectly or whatever. Like, I believe that you should take what works for you from this community and leave what doesn't. Only you know your time commitment, daily responsibility, access to resource, etc., blah, blah, blah. I don't think that's an unpopular opinion, but sure, yes, obviously. Also, like, that's also not an excuse, though, for toxicity. Like, if you're not spending a minimum of an hour a day on language learning, then you're just not serious and you don't even want to progress. And then, like, someone making a post that says that, and then people being like, well, this clearly doesn't work for you, just leave it. Like, no, that's toxic, and it's fine for us to say that that's toxic. Studying the grammar really is the best way to learn for some people. Just because you learned a certain way as a kid doesn't mean that's going to work for you now. I agree with this. Like, I don't think there is a best way, so I don't agree with that aspect. But some people like to study the grammar. Some people find that frame of reference really helpful. Sure. Same thing as before. I like textbooks and workbooks. You do you, boo. The easiest language to learn is one that you enjoy content in and are motivated to learn. Hardest language to learn is one you don't enjoy learning or the culture. The distance on the language family trees between your native language and your target language is bunk. Outside of identifying which languages will require you to learn a different script or word order or tones, it would be more accurate of time it takes to learn rather than difficulty. I think that's what it is. Like, even the international whatever institute thing, US government thing, explicitly, the categories are determined by the time. You wrote a little story in your head about what that meant, and then we're like, wrong. Like a Spanish speaker trying to learn Catalan, even if they're not 100% interested in it, versus a Spanish speaker trying to learn Mandarin or Japanese. Like, there just are things that are going to be easier, but agree with the underlying sentiment of don't worry about whether a language is supposed to be difficult or supposed to take a lot of time to learn, because if you are motivated to learn it and you enjoy the content, that time will pass by quickly, enjoyably, blah, blah, blah. I agree with that premise. The whole living in the country for immersion thing is super overrated. Lived in Norway for 2 years, and I'm worse in Norwegian than I am in French, where I've only spent about 6 weeks spread over a decade. Product of the fact that I like more French TV and films, and most Norwegian wanted to speak English with me, blah, blah, blah. I completely agree, especially now that I am living in a Spanish-speaking country. Like, you absolutely learn, like, the necessity things really, really well. Like, obviously, you learn, like, the language that you need to order food, to get on the bus, to do your, like, paperwork stuff. But otherwise, you can obviously get by without knowing too much, as long as you're not gonna socialize too much. And also, there's a very real, like, burnout, mental overwhelm thing that can happen that I am definitely experiencing, where, like, it can lower your enjoyment of the time that you do spend proactively in the language, because there's just, like, this static in the background all the time of that language. I like flashcards. I actually found Duolingo helpful to an extent, and there's too much. You have to learn a language this way. my way, or you're learning it wrong. We kind of talked about flashcards. Do whatever you want. Not for me, but whatever. Duolingo, I think that to an extent is doing a lot in this sentence. Like, of course, it's exposure to words and grammar and stuff in the language. So compared to doing nothing, it's going to be helpful. Whether it's the best use of the time, arguable for different people, different languages, different levels, situations, whatever. Learning a language solely for the purpose of consuming entertainment media is fine. Probably going to do that myself multiple times. Most people overestimate their level in their target language, 100%. And I think that probably I've done this, probably most of us have done this. Like, I think it's extremely easy to overestimate. More Duolingo. It's full of extroverts who erroneously equate being social in a language with language learning, and it suffers for it in the form of bad advice along the lines of, you have to speak all the time. Yes, I do think that, not like the corner of the language learning community that I'm normally in, but like the larger language learning community is definitely very extrovert centered. And the speaking a lot, like, there's nothing wrong with speaking a lot if that's something that motivates you, but I don't think it automatically makes you better at the language. I certainly have not been experiencing that over the past month. Ooh, more and more people speak a watered-down, internationalized form of their native tongue because they spend so much time learning and using English. Interesting. I think that depends a lot on the place and language. Because I would say I actually have experienced somewhat the opposite here in Spain. Like, Spain is very I don't want to say anti-English. Obviously, they promote English education and everything like that, but they're very anti-Spanish, being influenced by English. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing whatsoever, but they're very, like, even loan words from English, they are very strict about them being pronounced in Spanish, that kind of thing. I have been surprised how little English is interspersed in life here in Spain. So yeah, I think it just depends on where you are, what language it is. I know that this is a big thing in like German, that there are a lot of English words that are just used as is, and some people are obviously like trying to push against that and stuff, which I totally understand. So yeah, interesting. I would love to hear about your target languages, what you think. Ooh, I don't want to practice my target language with non-native speakers. I think that's a popular opinion, actually, and I disagree with it. I think it depends obviously on the situation. I don't think that the majority of your input should come from non-native speakers. Native speakers is a bit of a, potentially problematic construction. But for one thing, actually, if you never speak to non-native speakers, you might really struggle to understand them when the time comes that you need to, which you almost definitely will. So yeah, I don't know. I think that not wanting to practice is silly, but I understand not wanting to take in like huge amounts of input, like I don't know, if you were going to buy a subscription to like a podcast or something like that where you were going to listen to hours and hours and hours and hours of language, then like I understand that, I guess, but this does not seem like an important hill to die on for me. If native speakers compliment you on your ability to speak their language, you have a long way to go. If they extensively pick apart your mistakes instead, you're closer to fluency. High key, I agree with this person that it depends on the culture or person that you're speaking to. I do think that's probably, in general, somewhat true. If you speak like a professional but then occasionally make an error, yeah, they are probably going to be more likely to correct you because like it's, like they know that you're at that level where you're wanting those kind of things. Like, yeah, so I think there's some truth to that in most cases. The boring way of learning, study grammar, vocabulary is the most efficient by far if you take it seriously. Low-key, I agree with that. I do not think it's an unpopular opinion though, but I think that yes, if you are looking for pure efficiency, I do think that you can get to a much higher level of functionality in a language much more rapidly by actively studying it. I agree with that. Being a polyglot isn't worth it unless you plan on learning in decades and not months. That's very odd to me because no one is saying that polyglots don't learn in decades. I don't know, I don't understand the point of this necessarily, but I mean, I do agree that like there are people obviously who set out to become polyglots, and that's completely fine. Like, I would like to be a polyglot at some point in my life. I don't know that I'll ever be like polyglot, but like, yeah, I would like to know multiple languages for sure. And I definitely anticipate it taking decades. People vastly overestimate how bilingual the world is and how fluently most people are even capable of being in more than one language. That just varies so much by country. Like, huge portions of Asia, quite a lot of Europe, most people are at least bilingual. Large parts of Africa know more than one language usually. Like, so I think it's just largely cultural and necessity. I don't think people overestimate how bilingual the world is, to be fair, actually. And then, yeah, I do not think, what do you mean how fluently most people are even capable of being in more than one language? If you're saying most people who do not urgently need another language in their lives and are trying to learn another one as an adult will not put in the necessary time and effort to become extremely high level in that language or in multiple other languages, then yes, I agree with that. But that's very different than most people not being capable of being more fluent, very fluent in more than one language. Similarly, this person says, if you can't speak with a native without them slowing down or tailoring their speech to your level, you aren't fluent. Completely agree. I think 3 additional languages is about the maximum you can become fluent in within the lifetime of most people who study hard. Of course, there are exceptions, a small percentage of people who are obsessed with linguistics and their life revolves around it. Again, I just don't understand this need to impose some kind of outside cap or whatever on people. Like, yeah, we have limited time and energy and years on the planet. Of course, there's a limit for every individual person. But, like, I don't think we need to be coming up with these numbers to assign to it. Like, most people won't be able to do this. Like, just mind your own business. Like, what I always think of is, like, even if I only learn one language a decade for the rest of my life, and I'm counting Spanish as my 20s, even though I'm already in my 30s now, but I can learn Spanish in my 20s, another language in my 30s, another one in my 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Even if I don't learn anything in my 80s or don't live to my 80s, that's 6 languages, and that's 1 per decade. If you're counting things like Portuguese, that gives me essentially a decade off because I could learn that in like a couple years. Like, ooh, you didn't learn English just from watching TV. Half the people that say that come from countries where they at least study some English throughout their education. We also have readily available immersion, education plus immersion plus loanwords plus motive. I learned it and don't remember what I did. I think it depends a lot on the context. Like, I would say societies like the Netherlands, Sweden, like these countries where almost everyone has an extremely high level of English. I think it is largely because of TV and internet not being translated for them. And then once they get into school, that immersion, that input that they have is reinforced by like a thorough education in speaking English. But there are people who are from countries where English education is not a thing at all, who just spent a lot of time on the internet or gaming or watching anime or whatever dubbed in English. Like, there are so many people in the language learning community, even online, who are like, I had English for like 2 years in like 9th grade, and by that point I already had learned English from, spending 7 hours every night on, online games or whatever. So yeah, I think there's more people that did just learn from immersion than this person is wanting to acknowledge, but I also think a lot of people are not able to accurately identify how much of an impact formal education had or didn't have. Okay, well, I think that we've already been recording for quite some time now, so I will call it on this, but feel free to share your unpopular opinions in the comments or respond to any of these, and I will see you in the next video.